Ranking every Hex Perk in Dead by Daylight from worst to best. If you guys want to play Dead by Daylight with me, come drop a follow on my Twitch. I do open lobbies every single Tuesday at 1 p.m. PST. Also, if you guys enjoy this video and want me to do more ranking videos like this, feel free to drop a like and subscribe if you're new. Anyway, guys, let's get right into the list. The worst Hex Perk in Dead by Daylight is going to Huntress Lullaby. Huntress Lullaby is severely underrated, but unfortunately, it's still at the bottom of this list. For those of you who don't know, it basically just makes skill checks significantly harder. Every time the killer hooks somebody, you gain a token, and for each token, it makes the time between the little skill check sound and the skill check showing up shorter. So it basically just gives you less reaction time. And then once the killer has 5 tokens, there's just no audible warning when there's a skill check, so it's just completely silent. The only time this perk is ever good is if you're using it against newer survivors, or if you're using it against people who aren't really paying attention. However, if the survivors are missing a lot of skill checks, it is going to be a lot of gen slowdown because every single skill check that you miss takes 10% off of the generator. Okay, the next spot is going to Thrill of the Hunt. All this perk does is make it take longer for the survivors to cleanse your totems. And it's not even like a flat rate. It takes 10% longer per totem that's still alive in the trial. So to cleanse the first totem of the match, it'll take 50% longer, but then the next totem will take 40% longer, and then 30% longer, and so on. If it was 50% slower the entire match, then I could maybe see it being good, but as of now, the effect just isn't very good. Plus, it's a Hex perk, so if they break this totem first out of luck, then the slowdown is not going to apply to any of your other Hex perks. So maybe if you could get this effect without it being a Hex perk, it might be kind of mediocre, but being a Hex perk just makes it so bad. All right, coming into the 10th spot on this list, I gotta give it to Third Seal. Third Seal did get a buff recently, which is kind of nice. Anytime you damage somebody for the first time with a basic attack or a special attack, they will suffer from the blindness status effect until this perk is cleansed. The blindness status effect really isn't all that big of a deal. It just makes it so that you can't read any auras. So if you're using a perk such as Empathy or Bond, or you're using a map or Detective's Hunt or something, you're not going to be able to use those perks at all until you cleanse this totem. It also makes it so that you can't see survivors that are slugged on the ground, and you cannot see survivors that are on the hook. Except for the hook, you can still see the bubble when they actually get hooked, so at least you have a brief idea of where they are. This perk can see some use and has some potential, but it's really only useful against solo queue survivors because if there's a team, they could just communicate with each other where they are. All right, next up on the list, I have to give this to Crowd Control. This is essentially just Hex Bamboozle. It makes it so that any window that a survivor vaults gets blocked for 20 seconds. Sometimes this perk actually works against you because a lot of the times the survivors will feel safe if there is an unblocked window, and they'll make a move that you can read easily and then get a free hit. But it is a pretty decent perk on really good windows such as the shack window or some of the main building windows, because then those loops are just completely out of the picture. Plus, if you do the regular mind games that you normally use with Bamboozle, it's also very, very good. So for example, if they vault the window at a long wall jungle gym and you start to walk to one side but then moonwalk and vault the window, it'll throw them off guard, and then they quite literally have no options. But usually what this perk will do is just make survivors W key the entire time, which isn't exactly the most fun thing in this game. Okay, the 8th spot is going to Retribution. Retribution makes it so that if any of your Hex totems are cleansed, you're able to see the auras of all survivors on the map for 15 seconds. Information is extremely key, and if you're able to keep track of all of these survivors for 15 seconds, which is a pretty long time, especially like if you're in a chase or something, it could just provide you very good information that you may not have had otherwise. Being able to read survivor auras through walls is very, very underrated in my opinion, and it's especially good if you're going for like cross-map Huntress Hatchets or something. This perk is also really strong when you pair it with Haunted Ground, because then if they cleanse a Haunted Ground totem, you're able to see where every single survivor is on the map while their Haunted Ground is active. So this is just an insane combination, assuming they don't cleanse your Retribution first, but you can get really good value out of that. This also works with boons, so if a survivor blesses a Hex totem, it still activates Retribution. It also has a side effect of making the survivors oblivious for 45 seconds if they cleanse or bless any Dole totem, which is a nice little additional feature, but it really doesn't change much about this perk. All right, the next spot on this list is going to Haunted Ground. This is a very, very hit or miss perk. It can basically win you the game or do absolutely nothing, which is why it's right in the middle of this list. Haunted Ground spawns 2 Hex totems on the map, and if a survivor cleanses or blesses one of these 2 totems, it'll make everybody in the trial exposed for an entire minute. The problem with this perk is if you're not able to find a survivor within a minute, like if they're all hiding and just being really immersed, then you're gonna get absolutely no use out of this perk. But if you're mid-chase with somebody and you have like Infectious Fright, for example, and then you're able to down them and find another survivor, you can get immense value out of this perk because you're basically getting 4 health states for the cost of 2 health states, which is so strong. Exposed is by far the best status effect in the game because it eliminates the time it takes to win a second chase with that survivor. So if you're you're able to get like more than one down out of this perk, it's very, very strong. But if you're only able to get like one down or maybe even none, then obviously it's quite bad. Okay, the 6th spot is going to Plaything. So the actual effect of Plaything isn't the reason it's high on this list. What it does is when a survivor gets hooked for the first time, they become oblivious until they cleanse the Plaything totem. So they won't be able to see the killer's red stain and they won't be able to hear the killer's terror radius until they go and find that totem and cleanse it. Oblivious is a very scary status effect on some maps, so usually survivors are going to want to find that totem, and that's the reason why this perk is actually pretty decent, because it's an additional objective for the survivor and it activates for every single survivor on their first hook. I feel like this perk could be changed to make it so that it activates every single time a survivor is hooked, because the survivor can see the aura of the hex totem when within 16 meters of it, so it's really not that difficult to find. I think that change alone would make this perk pretty good. Okay, the 5th spot is going to Hex Blood Favor. This makes it so that anytime a survivor becomes injured by any means, all pallets within 32 meters of that survivor's location become blocked for 15 seconds. So if you think about it, that's actually 64 meters of total distance where all pallets will be blocked. And that applies to every single survivor in the game. And it's not just blocked for the survivor you hit, it's still blocked for every other survivor as well. This can help you get a lot of value, especially if you're doing a hit and run kind of playstyle, and this perk can actually make Gideon Meat Plant kind of viable. Okay, the 4th best hex perk in this game, I unfortunately have to say that it's going to noed. This perk is so good because it can allow any bad killer to get a 4K easily. I'm sure most of you know what it is, but I'm going to explain it anyway. As long as there's at least one dull totem remaining when all generators are completed, noed applies to that totem, and when noed is activated, every single survivor in the game suffers from the exposed status effect, and you also get a 4% increase to your movement speed. Exposed is the strongest status effect in the game, and being able to get that infinitely until this perk is cleansed without having to earn it at all is very, very strong. However, this perk isn't as good against good coordinated teams or good survivors that know where the totems spawn, because if all of the survivors just split up and look for totems, they're gonna find it within just a few seconds, so you're probably not even gonna get that much use out of it. Plus, this perk just gives you an insane amount of pressure in the end game for literally existing and not doing anything, which is so good. Okay, we're now on to the top 3 hex perks in Dead by Daylight. If you're hearing this, go comment a car emoji down below so I know who made it this far in the video. The 3rd spot is going to none other than Hex Ruin. Don't get me wrong, Ruin used to be the best perk in the game, but has since dropped off a lot in popularity because of the boon meta. A lot of survivors are starting to memorize totem spawns because they're going out of their way to boon them, which makes it so that they're starting to find your hex totems much easier, and you really won't get that much value out of Ruin unless it stays up for like 2 gens. So unfortunately, those games where you have Ruin cleansed within a minute of starting the match are happening way more frequently now, so sometimes it feels like there's not even a point in running this perk because it's basically just wasting a perk slot. However, if you are able to keep this perk up and active, or if you just get a really good totem spawn, this perk will absolutely carry you. It's so unbelievably strong while it's up that it's a very high priority for survivors to cleanse it. For those of you who don't know, it basically makes it so that if a survivor is not working on a gen, it regresses at 200% speed. So if a survivor has a gen at like 50% and they go to unhook somebody, by the time they get back, the gen will probably be back at 0%, which is so strong. But this perk is starting to become worse and worse as survivors start to learn the totem spawns. All right, coming into the 2nd spot, we have Devour Hope. Devour Hope is a little complicated, so I'm going to try to explain it as best as I can. Every time a survivor is saved from a hook while you're at least 24 meters away, Devour Hope activates. So if you hook a survivor, you have to be far enough away for the actual hex perk itself to light up, which means that you'll be able to get a token when the survivor is unhooked. So for every unhook while you're far away, you get a token. At 2 tokens, you get a 5% haste status effect for 10 seconds, 10 seconds after you hook the survivor. So it's basically like 10 seconds after you hook the survivor, nothing will happen. But then once you reach those 10 seconds, then the next 10 seconds, you'll have 5% extra speed. But the best part of this ability is at 3 tokens, every single survivor on the map becomes exposed permanently until they find this totem. This just gives you a ton of pressure mid-game. It's essentially giving you noed at the middle of the game, which is absolutely insane. Not only does it make it so that you can easily down people, it also makes it so that every single person in the trial has to drop what they're doing to go find this totem. So it slows down gen progress, it makes it really easy for you to snowball, it builds up a ton of pressure. The only problem with this perk is that they can cleanse it before you get to this point, so you can basically get 0 use out of it. But if you manage to get to the 3 tokens, even if you down 1 survivor, that's still a very strong effect. And then if you get to 5 tokens and they don't cleanse your totems by then, you can mori literally any survivor no matter what hook stage they're on, which is so strong. Like if there was a Dwight that's been hiding all game, game, you could just kill him instantly without having to go through the 3 hook stages. You're rarely ever going to get to 5 tokens though. But this is obviously an extremely strong perk, which is why it's number 2 on this list. But the best Hex perk in all of Dead by Daylight is going to Undying. Undying is extremely simple. It just gives any of your other Hex perks an extra life. Hex perks are some of the strongest perks in the entire game. Being able to make it so that the survivors have to find and cleanse 2 separate totems to get rid of the effect is so powerful, especially on a perk like Devour Hope. You could pair this with literally any of the Hex perks listed previously, and it just makes them 10 times better. For Ruin, it usually keeps it from getting cleansed within the first minute of the match. For Haunted Ground, you can get 2 uses of Haunted Ground. For Noed, you can get even more pressure in the endgame because they have to find 2 Noed totems to be able to get rid of the effect. For Devour Hope, it makes it significantly easier to get to 3 or even 5 stacks. Hello, Editing Kaito here. I forgot to mention that this perk got indirectly buffed with the introduction of the boon meta because it allows you to see the auras of survivors that are really close to any dull totem. So basically, you're going to see the auras of a survivor the entire time that they're blessing a totem. So it's a very good counter to boons because you're going to know exactly where they're putting them. This perk is undoubtedly the best Hex perk in the game. It's so strong, being able to give your Hex perks 2 lives. And it's still the best Hex perk, even being in the weakest state that it's ever been in. Let me know if you guys agree or disagree with this list down below.